嘿，大家好，我是娜姐。今天是2021年2月9号，星期二。今天呢，娜姐去参加了一个佛州这个爱国者俱乐部和本地共和党举办的一个政治活动哈。这个活动呢是邀请了罗杰斯通先生来做一个政治演讲那么罗杰斯通大家可能都知道，很多人都听说过哈 ，Roger Stone。那娜姐的很多节目中都提到了他，那他呢完全可以说是川普总统这个40年的老友好友哈。在川普上台之后这个民主党要构陷川普通俄门在这个过程中呢，他们就从这个罗杰斯通身上下手，可以说把他挖坑陷害，把他罗织罪名把他给抓起来了。而且是凌晨5、6点钟的时候，10几辆装甲车将近30个 FBI 探员冲到他们家，把他们家包围，然后把罗杰斯通抓起来。罗杰斯通就是将近70岁的一个老头，他家里也就是他的老伴儿和一条狗完全没有必要这样兴师动众。但是当时呢，就为了能够构陷川普总统，他们想要吓这个罗杰斯通，想让罗杰斯通呢去给他们导向他们这一边来指证川普。因为罗杰斯通跟川普是这么多年的交情，肯定知道川普的一些有的没的一些东西，起码编出来也有人信，因为毕竟他们两个人是就是很多年的交情但是呢，罗杰斯通还真的是厉害真的是经得起考验的老战士，对哈。那他呢是没有买账，而人家呢也没有手软，人家要就给他判刑，要打算把他送入监狱3年多的时间那而且是居然就跟他的律师说，你的这个客户是回不来了，要死在监狱里了。因为当时疫情很严重，那些强奸犯什么的都被放出来了，说疫情很严重，把他们放出来，可是居然要把这个罗杰斯通送入监狱那神奇的是呢，就在罗杰斯通一直不屈服，就说那没办法就去住监狱了就在这个第2天就要住监狱的时候居然川普总统下达一道行政令，就把他的刑期全部减掉真的是有点像那种刀下留人那样的一个戏码一样就是在最后一刻就眼看就要遭殃的时候突然就是快马加鞭的一个人来说刀下留人了那就是真的是很神奇。那之后川普总统在离开白宫之前的几天也彻底特赦了罗杰斯通这也就说明了他们两个的关系确实是还是非常的紧密的那么罗杰斯通来到这里呢，我们这个活动呢是在Marco Island 离我们这儿不远的一个城市一个岛 Marco Island 的这个意大利餐厅举办的那这个他讲了一些我觉得很重要的一些东西。他是首先讲了为什么民主党这样子的就锲而不舍的要弹劾川普总统。那还有重要的消息就是这个他就讲共和党这边或者说川普党这边接下来要怎么样做才能夺回美国。今天下午我一回来就做了一个直播，就是把罗杰斯通这个整个的他这个演讲重点都跟大家来做了一个总结和分析是用中文的那喜欢的朋友们可以去看我这个今天下午的这个直播节目那好的，我们现在就看罗杰斯通他这个演讲的这个原版全文
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, friends. Ann Brown is part of Republican Club, Republican Executive Committee. She's been one of our longest members. She's been here quite a while. She's going to do the invocation.
Thank you, Joanne. And Dear Lord, we ask for your blessings as we gather in honor of our great President Trump and those who were and are close to him. We pray that today's trial will once again and as usual show his greatness. We ask for your guidance, Lord, as we wade deep waters for the salvation of our country. Through the efforts of people like the great Roger Stone and our wonderful leaders, Joanne Bartolo and Tom Obama. Thank you.
Amen.
That was very sweet. Thank you. We need Roger. He's always there as the fighter. He never turned on the president, and we all know who he is. And a great honor, my friend, Roger Stone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, what an amazing turnout. I can't wait to hear what I have to say. Actually today I'm going to give a new speech. I had kind of a set speech that I gave prior to the election about why I believe that Donald Trump is the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln. With impeachment, what they actually seek to do is to bury his great accomplishments. What's most amazing about the president is how much he was able to get done given the implacable opposition of the elites of the two parties. Because make no mistake about it, the swamp is very deep. And the last thing they wanted was a president like Donald Trump who was his own man, who couldn't be bullied, who couldn't be bought, who couldn't be pressured, who only answered to the American people. We haven't seen this in Washington since Ronald Reagan was president. And he still will go down as one of our greatest presidents. But I experienced, because I worked for President Nixon, exactly how this works. As President of the United States, Richard Nixon reached a strategic arms limitation agreement with the Soviets. He desegregated the public schools without incident or bloodshed. He opened the door to China in order to play them off against the Russians, saving us hundreds of millions of dollars in defense expenditures. He ended the war in Vietnam. He gave us the 18-year-old vote. He ended the military draft. He launched the war on cancer. He had an incredible record. He saved Israel unilaterally in the 1973 Yom Kippur War by airdropping $36 million worth of lethal aid to the Israelis who had their backs against the sea due to a surprise attack by the Egyptians and the Syrians. But what does history tell us today? Richard Nixon, Watergate, impeachment. That's what they seek to do to our president, Donald Trump. So let's talk about his record for a moment. The most robust economy in American history. A record number of jobs created. The fastest wage growth in American history. The lowest unemployment among all groups, African Americans, Hispanics, women, Asians, all coming back into the United States to be invested here, to expand businesses here, to create jobs here. Rebuilding our military strength, which we had allowed to go fallow in the Obama years. Redoing the big one-size-fits-all trade agreements that were great for our trading partners, but not so great for us, sucking the jobs out of America. Giving us conservatives on the federal judiciary at all levels, maybe even the Supreme Court. That remains to be seen. No, it's an extraordinary record of accomplishment. And now they seek to erase it through this outrageous act of impeachment.
Maybe that's him.
It's not the president, so I'm not going to take it. It is it is obvious today that what we're seeing in Washington is performance art. It is yet another psyop for the American people. But now we have reached a new place in America, a place where if one honestly questions the integrity of the election based on what I believe is a massive amount of evidence of voter fraud, well, that's insurrection. That's sedition. That means you're a domestic terrorist. No, sorry. Our First Amendment rights are still intact. We have a right to question the outcome of the election based on a massive amount of evidence that I've seen myself. But now we're in a new game of guilt by association. Oh, Roger Stone was in Washington on January 5th and 6th, and he had his picture taken with a guy. Stop right there. I've had, I don't know, 50,000 pictures taken of me with people in the last 2 years. I'll tell you a story. When I was working for former President Nixon, back in the days before they had TSA in the airports, we were dashing to make a flight from what is now Reagan National Airport, was then National Airport in Washington, D.C. And we were flying to Newark, and we were late, and they were calling our flight, and we were dashing across the airport. I was carrying 2 briefcases, his and mine, and a woman stepped up, rather corpulent woman. She looked rather well fed. And she said, "Oh, Mr. President, I can't believe I'm meeting you. Can I get your autograph?" And she said, and he stopped and he said to me, "Put down the briefcases." And he said, "Certainly, madam. What's your name?" She said, "Well, my name is Clara." And he said, "Well, Clara, where are you from?" She said, "I'm from Davenport, Iowa." And he said, "Davenport, Iowa. You know, last time I was there was 1956. I was running for re-election with Ike, and we had an event at Yokin's Restaurant on Main Street." And she said, "Oh my God." She said, "I was there." And he said, "I thought so." And then with a flourish, he wrote, "To my friend Clara, with warmest regards, Richard Nixon." Meanwhile, Flight 321 for Newark, now final boarding call at Gate 7. So we run, we barely make our plane. We get on the plane, and I said, "Mr. President, we barely made this. Why did you stop and give that woman an autograph?" He said, "Let me tell you something, son. Don't ever refuse a request for a photo or an autograph. Otherwise, they think you're a real asshole." And I have taken that to heart. So yes, as I have traveled across the country in the last 2 years, because the witch hunt conducted by Robert Mueller gave me legal costs well in excess of $2.5 million, money I did not have. So yes, I lost my home, I lost my insurance, I lost my car, I lost my savings, I lost the small college fund I'd set up for my grandchildren, which was funded by the proceeds from my book sales. I had no choice but to set up a legal defense fund and work my tail off across the country to raise the money to put up a legal defense in what I learned was a completely rigged Soviet-style show trial. A trial in which I could not have won no matter what I did, given the corruption of the jury forewoman and the pretrial rulings of a deeply biased judge. It is only through the grace of God and the fact that I reaffirmed my faith in the Lord that I am with you today. Because the president got the courage and the wisdom and the strength to do an extraordinarily controversial thing. First, to spare me from being incarcerated in a prison with over 200 active COVID-19 cases at age 68 and with a history of asthma, a certain death sentence, and then just before Christmas to pardon me, recognizing that I never received a fair and impartial trial. God bless you, Mr. President. Yet we see the same witch hunt gearing up again. Oh, ABC News says Roger Stone was seen outside of his hotel with members of the Oath Keepers. Well, I never heard of the Oath Keepers prior to my going to Washington for the events of the 5th and 6th. Actually, I first heard of them when we had a very successful event in Miami. Now, it's a sad fact of life that I cannot, even in South Florida, I cannot leave my home without fear of my life. We have had a serious number of death threats, of threats against my family, threats against my children, threats against my grandchildren. It comes through the email, it comes through the mail, it comes in the US mail. It's vicious, it's ugly, but you can't live in fear. But it is an absolute necessity when I travel, particularly outside of Florida, to have security, to have paid security. Now, back during my trial, I could legitimately pay for that through my legal defense fund. But since being pardoned, those costs fall on me. And therefore, I did raise a small amount of money to pay for security in Washington. But unfortunately, I then learned that every off-duty police officer that I had previously used for security during my trial was engaged in their full-time job as a police officer because of the events of the 5th and 6th. And therefore, the Oath Keepers voluntarily supply security. Now, who are the Oath Keepers? They are off-duty law enforcement officers. They are current and former members of the military or law enforcement officials who are sworn to uphold the Constitution, not to violate the Constitution. They were most professional. Now, if the Oath Keepers were involved in some insurrectionist plan to storm the Capitol, I don't know about it. I was shocked as every American, but here's what I can tell you. AOC and I have something in common. Neither one of us was in the Capitol on January 6th. In fact, just as it happens, on the 5th I gave 2 speeches, one to the Virginia Women for Trump, and one to the 80% Coalition. You can find both of those speeches online. I measured my words very carefully. You'll find no call to violence. You'll find no call to illegality. What you will find is an honest objection to the results of an election and an admonition to follow the constitutionally prescribed process to challenge those results. Now, we were unsuccessful in that. But today, through guilt by association, Jones knows Brown, who knows Smith, who knows Johnson, who knows Stone. Therefore, Jones is a Stone associate. He's Stone connected. Thank you, ABC. You should be ashamed of yourselves.
Yeah.
This is the new McCarthyism. It is repugnant. I don't want to talk so much today, though, about the past. I want to talk about the future. I want to talk about where we go from here. The entire result of the 2020 election was only sustainable because for the first time in American history, we have the absolute censorship of all mass communications. So whether it is network television or cable television or print media or the internet, we now have complete censorship. It means that there is only one point of view, one narrative allowed. One of the things I urged the president to do shortly after he was elected was to deal with the issue of internet censorship. The fact that conservatives and Christians and Republicans and libertarians and free thinkers and Trump supporters have been systematically deplatformed on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, have been demonetized, but more importantly, their free speech rights have been snuffed. And that is important. You see, it is only the rise of a robust alternative media based in the internet that allowed for Donald Trump's election in 2016 to begin with. Without an open, free exchange on the internet, Donald Trump would have had no platform with which to counterattack the mainstream media. And if you think about it, in 2016, what you saw was the media building Donald Trump up in the nomination phase because they wrongly believed that he would be the easiest candidate for Hillary to beat, and then an immediate attempt to begin tearing him down after he was nominated when they found out he was the only Republican who could beat Hillary Clinton. Now, they took no chances. They want to put the toothpaste back in the tube. And we've had the widespread internet censorship that we have seen. Now, that internet censorship violates our current antitrust laws, violates through the monopolistic practices of the social media giants. This is something that the Trump Justice Department should have dealt with. But we sure couldn't count on Jeff Sessions, nor could we count on, as we learned today, Bill Barr. It is one of the great missed opportunities of the Trump years. Is this on? Good joke. Is this an audience or an oil painting? So, the first thing we must do is to deal with the issue of internet censorship. That can be done in two ways. Governor Ron DeSantis is out of the gate already with a terrific proposal that would ban censorship of internet and social media providers here in Florida. These companies exist on the basis of enormous tax breaks and tax incentives. We have to hit them where they live to get a free, fair, open exchange of ideas on the internet. Then, we need to go back into these states where the Democrats did an extraordinarily effective job of going into the key states and loosening the state election laws to set the stage for the abuses that we believe happened in the 2020 election. Now, if you've been sending your money to the Republican National Committee, you might wonder, where the hell have they been? Where were they when this was happening? They raised $200 million to support the president's fight for integrity in the election, but they didn't spend a penny of it on that. They were asleep while the Democrats were systematically going into Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Arizona, changing the election laws to make fraud easier. No, we need a comprehensive effort to go back into these states on a one-by-one basis and correct the election laws to ensure the integrity and transparency of our elections. The third step, we need to clean house in the Republican Party. Now that does not mean fighting with every other Republican in Collier County. But we do need to recognize that the Republican establishment supported Donald Trump only because they had to. Because back home in their states and their districts, the president was far more popular than any individual Republican member of Congress. Let me say two words that will prove my point. Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham was, as you know, a protege of John McCain, who was involved in moving the fake Steele dossier to the FBI that smeared our great president, then candidate Trump. Lindsey Graham recognized back in South Carolina, while the president's far more popular than Senator Graham, which is why, on occasion, he gave lip service to supporting the president. Now, until you've had 29 FBI agents in full SWAT gear and heavily armed raid your home at 5 o'clock in the morning to take you into custody for the first time non-violent crime of lying to Congress, you haven't lived. But when that happened, Senator Graham put out an immediate press release. He was going to get to the bottom of who ordered this outrageous raid on Stone's home, which my wife still has nightmares about. Well, Senator Graham, we're still waiting. And we'll probably wait forever. No, we need a top-to-bottom cleansing of the Republican Party. And that means we have to get rid of the country club Republican establishment types who like the status quo. They like things just the way they are. They're perfectly prepared to be in the minority. They're perfectly prepared to get crumbs from Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. No, that's not our Republican Party. We are the party of America first. Yes. We want to put the American people first. You see, the Trump movement, as the president himself has said on many, many occasions, is bigger than any one person. It is a new Republican Party, a Republican Party rooted in the values of the middle class. We are the party of working Americans. We are the party that stands for constitutional principles. We are still the party of free enterprise, of liberty, and to a fidelity to our U.S. Constitution. Therefore, I am going to be active in trying to recruit primary challenges to all of those Republicans who voted against the president in this recent impeachment event. Again, though, I would point out, until we fix the election laws, we cannot have an honest and fair election. And until we have fixed the internet censorship problem, we cannot fix the election laws. And then lastly, quite obviously, I believe that the Biden policies of austerity, the Biden policies on COVID-19, the Biden policies regarding taxes and regulations mean the stage will be set for a revival of our great Republican Party in 2022. And if we can nominate a candidate who is capable of galvanizing the Trump America First base in the party, perhaps our former president himself, if not, then someone else who adheres to those exact same principles, then we will be in a position to take back the White House. But let's remember, there are 3 steps. First, we have to clean up the issue of internet censorship to give us our voice back. Secondly, we need to clean up these state election laws on a one-by-one, case-by-case basis to ensure that we have honest, fair, transparent elections. Then we must clean up our party and get rid of those who refuse to lead, get rid of those who refuse to support an America First agenda that the American people have demonstrated they overwhelmingly want. And then we must nominate good men and women in 2022 and 2024. Hold on a second, I'm going to take this off. I've only got about 2 more hours left. At this point, I would be happy to take some of your questions, and then I'm going to sit down and eat. So, yes. Well, actually, I think it's the other way around. What they will find is you can't impeach him because he's not in office anymore. And therefore, that will be the principal argument of his lawyers today, that this is a show trial. There's no, you can't remove somebody from office who has already been removed by the fact that their term ended. And there is no way around that. There's not going to be a finding later about the outcome of the election. Those of you who have read on the internet that the president secretly signed the insurrection, all of that is nonsense. It's just not true. And therefore, yes, I think that we are stuck with Democratic leadership for the next 4 years. And we need to stop crying about spilled milk and try to figure out how to fix the problem going forward. Yes.
If so, do we need a third party? One.
Well, I was disappointed in two of the Supreme Court justices being unwilling to hear some of the more central cases, that was a great disappointment. I'm not optimistic. Those would happen to be, ironically, two of the Bush appointees that are not with us. Look, I think the 2020 election is over. I don't think we're going to win it on the basis of litigation, because in America, even though some things are legal, if they don't have adequate public support, then there is no way to enact them. I think that's where we are, because of the censorship of all mass-based communications. There is no way to get our side of it before the American people in a fair way. We were denied access to the courts. The state legislatures, and mostly the Republican establishment, didn't have the belly to fulfill their duties, to respond, or I should say to review the election results and pass judgment on their integrity. So, look, anything can happen. This is politics and nothing's impossible. But I don't expect the courts to overturn the election result as it has been certified by the Electoral College. Yes, sir.
Mr. Stone, in 2016, the Republicans had the House, the Senate, the Presidency, all three branches. They had Mr. Biden cold on bribing a foreign government. I'll give you $1 billion and call off the dogs. They had Hunter Biden cold, Burisma, Russia, nothing happened. The Republicans had all of the committeeships, the leadership positions, all the investigations, nothing happened. You have Judicial Watch, they're investigating and subpoenaing all this stuff. Nothing happens. Now, you and we would like to see taking on the entire Republican Party to change things. And it's going to be like Sisyphus pushing that rock up the hill. You're going to get so far and the rock comes down. Isn't it better to try to work within the party rather than splintering off into what you're apparently advocating?
No, let me be very clear. No, let me be very clear. I'm opposed to the idea of a new party. I have a long piece at stonecoldtruth.com. Let me tell you why. There's a number of reasons. First of all, we have a two-party system. In this country, the most lame Republican nominee you can imagine for any office begins with 35% of the vote, and you add from there. The most lame Democratic nominee probably starts with around 38, 40% of the vote, and they add from there. When you are a new party or an independent, you start at 0, number one. Number two, just getting your name on the ballot in all 50 states, I've done it because I briefly left the Republican Party when they nominated Mitt Romney, enough said, and joined the Libertarian Party. They're even crazier than the Republicans. But I was successful in getting their nominee, Gary Johnson, on the ballot in 49 states. It cost almost $12 million. And we still got cheated in 2 states where we should have been on, Michigan and Oklahoma. So ballot access is difficult, and we're talking about 2022, so there's ballot access for congressional candidates and local candidates, extraordinarily difficult and expensive. And then there is the Commission on Presidential Debates. They sponsor the presidential debates. Now, it's not a commission, it's not appointed by the president, and it's certainly not about debate, because they want to limit the debate to the Republicans and the Democrats. No, there's no reason to form a new party. We're a majority within the Republican Party. We just have to assert our position as a majority. The Trump constituency, the America First constituency within the Republican primaries, we are the majority. As Barry Goldwater said at the 1960 convention, when he declined the nomination for presidency to endorse Vice President Nixon, this is our historic home. Let's roll up our sleeves and go to work and take control of our own party before we go form a new party. We don't need a new party. Yes, sir.
Mr. Stone, Colonel Nance, Army retiree. You mentioned 2 things, integrity and cost. You mentioned it took 12 million to put one candidate onto the ballot in the United States. Thinking locally, during this last election, we had a lot of qualified candidates, 2 of which were self-funded, yet the PAC money selected, identified a candidate, and therefore that candidate ultimately won because of the financial money that came from outside of the state. How can we as independent citizens actually start reviewing who is financing our candidates early? We need it early on in order to identify the integrity of that candidate before the PAC money starts influencing the ideas and minds of the constituents. So if you've got a method or technique to where we can actually start vetting the candidates, where his money's coming from, so it's very apparent and transparent, that would sure help us.
All right, let me address that. First of all, Colonel, thank you for your service to our country. I think you said the key word, which is transparency. In other words, average citizens shouldn't have to go through a 100-page filing at the last minute to find out where candidates' money came from. What I believe is that any contribution above a certain dollar amount needs to be reported immediately in a standalone filing that is easy to find. And I would prohibit PAC contributions in the final quarter. So you cannot go in and buy an election late when no one will know about it. Right. There are constitutional issues involved here. I am one who believes that money is speech, and therefore I'm opposed to limits, and I'm opposed to limitations on who can give. For many years in this country, it was perfectly legal for a labor union to give, but not a business. That makes no sense to me. So I think greater transparency and immediate transparency would address the issue that you speak of. Yes?
Thank you for being here. I got just a couple questions. The first one, I agree 100% with everything you said about the plan of attack to change things for 2022, 2024, but I kind of feel like we don't have any Republican leadership that is pissed off enough to make it happen. So I'm just curious if you have any specifics on how or why you might believe that it will happen. And the second part is I ran locally for office back in Columbus, Ohio, and part of the problem, and I don't know how this gets addressed, is the local chairman, the local parties that have chairmen that play BS politics, and they don't let the best person run. I wanted to run. They had their own person, their own candidate that was, a rhino, and that's who they wanted, and that's who they got together, and nobody could primary them. So how do you get around that? We got to attack the local parties because they are dictating who runs in the primaries, and oftentimes they don't let anybody in.
Well, first of all, let's not assume that my neighbor just up the road, the former president of the United States, is just going to disappear, because he's not. He remains the titular head of this party, and he's a powerful force because he speaks for the America First agenda. And there are people like me, like Joanne, like Tom, who are ready to go out and battle the rhinos. We're not afraid to take on the country club Republicans. So many others, like Christie, people in this room. No, it's up to us. You see, those decisions are made in primaries. And primaries are decided by voters, not party bosses. So we have to get off our asses and get out there and work. Like Goldwater said, it's our party. Let's roll up our sleeves and take it back. I'm ready to do that. I know many of you in the room are as well. Another question. One more question before I starve to death. Yes, sir.
Why did in the election, presidential election, 4 or 5 states that Trump needed to win, and he was ahead in all of them? We get fake water main breaks and all the nonsense that went on. largely every one of them. And they all changed their election laws, which were unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court said it's not worthy to look into that situation. That's a huge problem. That's basic. So I'm not concerned. We're Americans. If you don't have the confidence in the voting system, you got nothing.
No, you're absolutely right. But if you have no platform from which to say that to the American people and to organize them and mobilize them, then you lose. It goes back to the issue of internet censorship and mass media censorship. Until we get our voice back, we can't fight for fair, transparent election laws. We can't fight to clean up our party and reform it in the image of the American First agenda. So the steps I've outlined in order, something that I've given a lot of thought to. I've made a living for 30 years, almost 40 actually, electing people to public office. But if our elections cannot be guaranteed to be fair and transparent, what good person, what man or woman will want to dedicate a year of their life to running for public office, raising all the money they need, executing a letter-perfect campaign, and then losing because you don't get an honest count? What person will put their way through that? So I've talked about the steps I think we need to take. I am blessed to be with you today. As I said earlier, I'm only here through the grace of God. It is only because of a riveting conversation that I had with Reverend Franklin Graham several months before my trial that I summons the strength and the faith to see this thing through. I think, as most of you know, in July of 2019, when I was going to trial in January of 2020, the government contacted my lawyer who flew to Washington, and they said, look, your client's going to jail for the rest of his life. He's going to die in prison. We have this list of 29 phone calls between he and candidate Trump in 2016. And we think it's time for your client to remember. It's time for your client to come clean and admit that all of these calls between he and Trump were about coordinating with the Russians. And I had a two-word answer for it. And I realized that there was no way out. It is only through the grace of God that I reaffirmed my faith, and God answered my prayers. And that God gave the president the strength and the courage and the wisdom to give me my freedom. Now, sadly, I see Witch Hunt 2.0, where ABC and CNN are out saying, oh, Stone's belief in God and his apocalyptical view of the future of America is responsible for the riot at the Capitol. That's ridiculous, but that's exactly what CNN said. So I say this. Afterwards, I'm going to be selling, yes, I need one of the sample stones. After lunch, first of all, I will be glad to sit with you, to stand with any of you who'd like to have a picture taken. It'd be my honor. I will, as long as none of you are domestic terrorists, I'll be happy to have my picture taken with you. This is a Roger Stone. Now, this happened one day when I was out jogging, and I noticed that my next door neighbor had these beautiful white stones in their driveway, and I took one and I took a flare pen and I wrote on it, Roger Stone. And I took it to my wife and I said, you know what this is? She said, what? I said, this is a Roger Stone. She said, very funny. So I started selling these on my website as a paperweight. Not a weapon, it's a paperweight. And I didn't sell any of them, like none. And then New York Magazine, the New York Observer, and Rolling Stone simultaneously wrote articles mocking me for selling these stones, which I was doing to raise money for my legal defense fund. And guess what? I sold 5,000 of these in a week. So, you will have your opportunity to get your very own Roger Stone, or one of my books. I brought the book, The Myth of Russian Collusion. The judge threatened to throw me in jail because I wrote this book. She claimed that it violated her gag order, in which I was unconstitutionally allowed to defend myself in the 16 months that I was standing trial, or preparing to stand trial. Unfortunately, the publication date of this book was substantially before the imposition of this unconstitutional gag order. By the way, I appealed the gag order to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, who sat on my appeal right up until the time of my trial and then rejected it. So, I thank you for being here. I thank you for your support of the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln. I thank you for your prayers and your support. I'd be happy to chat with you and get a photo after lunch. And if you're interested, please pick up your very own Roger Stone or your book. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you. Very kind. And now, let's eat.